So step one was centering. Step two, we've opened up the ball of clay. And step three now is we're going to lift and shape the ball of clay. I'm going to do that by slowing my wheel down a little bit more. If we get the ball going too fast, what will happen is the centrifugal force will pull the clay pot apart. We obviously don't want that. If we go way too slow, such as barely moving, our hands can't move slow enough to do anything more than put little lines in the side of the pot. If you're making lines on the outside of the pot that look like this, little grooves, you're not lifting the clay and shaping at all. So instead, we want a slower but decent speed. And what we're going to do is we're going to put our hands one inside and one outside, and we're going to lift this open piece of clay. So to recap, we started on the left to center with our left hand. We opened with both hands. And just like in reading a sentence, moving from left to right, we're now going to end up over here on the potter's wheel. What I like to tell my students is that when you're going to lift the clay, you should only lift the clay at 3 o'clock. Even though your view is this way, if you're sitting at the potter's wheel, 3 o'clock would be right over here on a clock. That is the only place where your hands should be for lifting this. Some potters will move their hands down here between 4, 5, and 6, but I find for most beginners, 3 o'clock is about the best place for it. So I'm going to get more water on here. We should always have lots of water as a beginner. And I'm going to put my hands together sort of like a little kid when they pray. Putting their hands together, locking their thumbs over, and that's going to make sure that my hands are stable and together. Still using that wrestler pose where I'm leaned over the wheel. My head is actually just not even a foot away from my pot. That's going to help secure my arms so my hands don't wobble, because this part right here, if you're not very firm, the clay can start wobbling your hands and you lose control of the pot. So, hands together, and starting right at the bottom, I'm going to squeeze a small amount of clay, and working very slowly, I'm going to pull my hands up at 3 o'clock and lift them up and out. And when I get to the top, just before it feels like my fingers are going to fall off the top of this clay, I'm going to slowly sneak away. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Nice and slow, getting my hands off of there. Now, as you're throwing, you're going to have lots of this gooey stuff that we call slip. This stuff is excess, and when it's water and it's pretty wet, you can reuse it to wet the sides of your pots. If at any time you get a big chunk that comes off, you don't want to put it in your throwing water because you're going to have to clean that bucket out later. Instead, you set it aside and we will recycle that later. For now, I've made my first pull, and really, I could stop here. I have lifted the pot. It's a little bit thinner, it's a little bit even, but right now, it's about an inch, inch and a half thick. We're shooting for more about the thickness of your finger to your pinky, about 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch. So I'm going to repeat this step until I have the pot the way I want it. Get lots of water on here. My hands go together, back at 3 o'clock. And I'm going to squeeze this clay again. And I'm going to pull it up and out. I like to rest my right thumb on the top. That kind of helps stabilize the top of the pot. And also, it keeps the clay from cracking as I'm stretching and lifting it up. Sometimes you'll get little cracks on the top of your pot, what we call the lip. And putting my thumb on there not only helps stabilize it, but also helps keep cracks from forming on there. So again, slowly sneaking away. And my pot's a little bit taller now. It's getting to where I want it to be. I still think it could go a little bit thinner, so I'm going to add some more water. Always touching the clay very gracefully, never very forcefully. And I'm going to go back in and I'm going to squeeze this a little bit more. And I'm going to pull this clay up and out. Notice that you can see the grooves that my fingers are creating. They're very close together. We don't want it to look like a barber's pole with one big stripe up the side. We want it to look more like a record with tiny, tiny little grooves. That means my fingers have to move very slow and very consistent. This is probably the trickiest part of the throwing process, but you will get it. One of my favorite quotes related to art is by Ezra Pound, and it says that craft is simply perfected attention. You don't have to be talented, you don't have to be gifted to do this, but being quiet, listening to your breath, not thinking about things outside of the school, not holding conversations, but simply paying attention, being in the moment, it's very zen, then you'll be able to do things that are very, very artful and beautiful that people will think are talent, but really it's just you paying very close attention to what you're doing. At this point, I have myself a bowl. And if you've noticed, the only tools I've used so far, besides the potter's wheel, is my bucket, my water, and my sponge. I've needed no other tools. In fact, in many countries, people use nothing more than a little piece of ground, clay, and water to make their projects. We're very fortunate where we live to have these great, amazing tools that we simply plug into the wall and they do most of the work for us. So at this point, I could be done, but I want to use this other tool here. I want to show you how to use this rib. Notice it has a flat side and it has a curved rounded side. I'm going to use this curved rounded side. I'm going to hold it in my left hand and I'm going to put my thumb over the name of the tool. And now I'm going to use this smooth part to smooth the inside. So this is going to act as my left hand while my right hand holds it on the outside. And I'm simply going to drag this tool, this rib, across the inside while my hand holds the outside, and that's going to make it nice and smooth. That's going to help if you're going to be using this pot for anything such as eating cereal. This is kind of a high school guy size cereal bowl, right? About a good half a box. If I leave those finger grooves in there and you drag a spoon across it, you're going to get a thunk, 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 thunk. This rib is going to help smooth it up so it glides nice and smooth. Functionality is sort of important when making pottery. So I've smoothed the inside, but my bowl is a little tall. I might want to widen it up. So I'm going to add a little more water. And what I'm going to do is using the rib on the inside, I'm going to hold it on the outside and simply pull out, and my project will start getting wider. So I hold it on the outside, and simply pressing this tool, I can widen up my bowl. You'll learn a lot about how to use the tools simply by using them, holding them different ways, moving fast, moving slow. Those are all things that artists will pick up along the way that you don't need to be taught. And that relates a lot to our essential question of how do learned skills and develop talents lead to greater art? A lot of it is just by doing it, by practicing. Just like a musical instrument, just like dance, just like sports, the things that you get very good at, usually it comes from a passion to do it and then a lot of hard work and practice. And, as I mentioned before, careful attention. So I've made my project. I like the way it looks. I don't want to do a whole lot to it right now, such as decorating or adding other things. I want to let the clay stiffen up a little bit. So what I need to do is I need to let this clay dry a bit. I'm going to use my wooden knife here, using this sharp edge, to drag along the bottom. And the only job that's going to do is it's going to smooth up that bottom edge, and it's going to take away a little of this extra clay so that my bottom isn't all rough and jagged, so that when I go to trim it later in another video, which I'll show, it's going to be much easier so you don't have rough, bumpy edges on here. My last tool I'm going to use is my cutoff wire. And again, I want to refrain from wrapping it around my finger. I've actually pulled this so hard that it's went down into my skin before. So instead, simply holding it, being nice and brave, pulling it tight. I like to turn my wheel slowly and pull straight through. And I've made a nice cut there, and my project is now released from the bat. At this point, I need to dry it. So a couple options. If I have plenty of time, I'll set it in front of the fan for about 15 minutes. And as a beginner, that's pretty convenient because that's roughly how long it takes for you to make a pot on the wheel. In the meantime, I'll make another project. At that point, I want to take this off of the wheel, set it in front of the fan, let it dry a little bit, and when it's turned to leather hard, meaning stiff enough that I can pick it up without it flopping and without leaving fingerprints, I'm going to pick it up and wrap it into a plastic bag, and that plastic bag is going to keep it in that dry state until it's time for me to learn how to trim. So, hope you enjoyed this video. This will show you how to make a bowl, and we will have more videos that will show you how to make plates, vases, mugs, and much more. Everybody have fun.